Welcome to Willow Brook. Anyone who's suffered any of my previous walking videos will know that we often cross this one, and it's one of my favourite, well, it is my favourite waterway in the Peterborough area. It's only about 15 miles long. It rises somewhere on the western side of Corby, and it's always intrigued me for two reasons. One, it seems out of sync with the countryside around here. It's a bit barren at the moment because we're still in mid to late winter, but it's a beautiful, beautiful brook. And you know, you could see this sort of stream up in the Dales, Peak District and places like that, but not around Peterborough. It just doesn't seem to fit in with the surroundings, which is great because I love it and always enjoy seeing it. But it's also intrigued me because 10 miles upstream it flows through what's left of the old Corby Steelworks. And certainly in the sort of 60s and 70s, that was an extremely industrial, polluted area. It used to dump its water back into Willow Brook, and the water was, not surprisingly, very, very polluted up at the top end. And yet down here, we're probably 10 miles downstream from Corby, near Fotheringhay. It's in effect a trout stream. It's that clean that they've put trout in here over the decades, and although I haven't been able to see one today, they do run up and down this stream. So it's a pretty remarkable transition from industrial waste and a polluted river to a trout stream. So it's always fascinated me, and I've always been interested in the idea of trying to find where it comes from. I know it comes from west of Corby. I've got some ideas where I think the source is, and what I want to do on this video is basically head out to Corby, other side of Corby to be exact, find the source, and then travel downstream to where it finishes, which is near the village of Elton. And it should be interesting. There's a few places on the way that look interesting on maps, so hopefully on foot it'll look just as interesting. So yeah, Willow Brook, and this is all about tracing the entire length of Willow Brook from source to finish. So I'm heading off now up to Corby, where I hope to see you at the source. See you then. Okay, welcome to Corby. Just about to head over to Ash Coppice. It's about 1 kilometre to the western side of Corby, which is where there should be a spring, and it's that spring that is the launch pad for Willow Brook. The countryside around here is quite nice, quite rural, quite peaceful, and it used to be like this back in the early 1900s for the whole of the journey of Willow Brook for the next sort of 3-4 miles. I mean, obviously there was no Corby New Town. There was a Corby village, had about 1,500 people there, nothing like the 60,000-70,000 we have now in Corby New Town. But yeah, it used to flow west to east, pretty much in a straight line. I mean, all streams zigzag a little bit, but really it travelled due west to due east, pretty much uninterrupted until you get to the other side of what we now know as Corby. And that's all changed now, because obviously streams don't go through towns, and it's had to be redirected significantly, and I hope to make some sense of that redirection on this journey best I can. It isn't easy, because nobody seems to know, even the Environment Agency, exactly which bit's overground and which bit's underground, but we're going to try our best to make some sense of it all once we've found this spring and moved on from there. I also need to mention that, look, you know, if you live in Corby, you'll know about the Willow Brook as you know it. There'll be streams probably near where you live, and you've always known them as Willow Brook, and that's because they are Willow Brook. But all streams, all rivers, as they get near their source, fragment, and Willow Brook is no different. There is a northern stream, there is a central stream, a central east stream, and there's a southern stream. These are Environment Agency terms. We're following the southern stream. We're not following the others, we're just following the southern stream. Reason being, it's the longest. It stretches to the other side of Corby, which is where we are now, and the others don't do that. It's also the stream, the branch, call it what you like, that the Environment Agency says the main stream, and that's good enough for me. So that's why we're following this one. But you know, don't get upset if I'm talking about a stream you don't know as Willow Brook. Your stream is also a Willow Brook, it just isn't this one, and I consider this to be the main one, and that's the reason for the video. So yeah, I've got to sneak down and try and find this spring, because I'm not even sure I should be on the land to find it, but if I don't find it, the video won't make sense. So I'm going to dart in, grab some footage, and then run for my life before somebody shoots me, or not. There it is, just under that bracken at the back there is the spring that feeds Willow Brook. This is the starting point. This sort of holding small pond flows into a ditch just behind this hedgerow, and then it heads left towards those trees, and then it hooks right and travels west to east until you hit the Uppingham Road, and that's where we'll be heading next to see how it copes with the edges of Corby Newtown. This is the water really that's moving both as a combination from the spring and a drainage ditch that the spring rolls into. As it does on several occasions downstream, you just collect more and more side streams and ditches to build up the volume of the flow. And yeah, this is it now. Willow Brook, heading due east. Well, we've moved down about 1 kilometre now from the source of Willow Brook. It's about 3 foot wide here, and this is where Willow Brook basically slams into Corby Newtown. In the background there you can probably just see some large vehicles moving past. That's the Uppingham Road, and basically across the Uppingham Road you're into the sort of urban sprawl of Corby Newtown. And of course at one point, going back to the early 1900s, this would have been open countryside with woodland, trees, open fields, and whatever, and we would still have probably the best part of 2 miles before we would have reached Corby village. But such has been the expansion of Corby, we meet Corby in about 100 yards from here, and this Willow Brook, or this part of Willow Brook, should be disappearing up ahead. We'll try and find it down into a culvert that takes it underneath Corby Newtown before emerging about a further mile or so into the township, and we'll try and find that. Well, there you have it. Not the most attractive stretch of Willow Brook, but this is where it, as I say, it crashes into Corby Newtown. It goes into this bricked up culvert. It basically goes under what was the expanded Corby Newtown. So I think it runs for about a mile from here underground, and I'm going to try and pick it up where it comes out. We're taking to the air now, and a big thank you to Corby's finest, Ian Bateman, for all of the drone footage in this video. Helped us to get to places where down on the ground you've got no chance of getting to. We're following Willow Brook here. The source is right at the top of the picture, just going off screen, and we are now heading down across the field towards the Uppingham Road. We're just swinging the camera around now to show Uppingham Road just coming into view on the left in a moment, and of course the edge of Corby New Town where Willow Brook disappears from sight. This is the exit point for the culvert we've just seen running under Uppingham Road. We're down near the Sower Lees School alongside Gainsborough Road, and this is where it sees the light of day again, not for very long. Follow it along, or we will follow it along as far as I can, but it won't be up here for too long. Just crossing Lowry Close, and the brook just continues a short distance from here to that sort of scrub at the top there, and then it vanishes underground until further down Gainsborough Road. Okay, well, we've raced away from Gainsborough Road there. It's a bit difficult to film because it's next to a school, but yeah, it emerges from that culvert we saw at the Uppingham Road for about 150 yards alongside the school. Then it vanishes, and then it comes up again at the end of Gainsborough Road where it joins Oakley Road, where you've got the little supermarket, but it's only there for about another 10 yards, and it's in a fully fenced off area that is totally inaccessible, so I couldn't film that at all. It then disappears in a culvert and shoots right across Corby New Town to the St James Industrial Park at the back of Tesco and Weldon, or just off Weldon Road, and it emerges here in a culvert. It's very, very difficult to film, but I'm going to climb up on a bridge and try and just give you some footage of it coming back out into daylight, and it stays out in daylight from this point forward, and very much used to head straight through the bottom end of the steelworks from this point. Not the most glamorous of settings. Once again, somewhere down here off this bridge. I don't know if you can even see this. I'll climb up. There you go. Back in daylight. As I say, not very glamorous, but heads off towards the old steelworks site and into Weldon. Just moved a little further downstream now, still on the southern edge of what would have been the steelworks in its heyday. Well, again, no disrespect to Corby, but we've escaped, and we're on the edge of Weldon now. This is the Weldon Woodland Park, and as you can see, Willow Brook now looks like Willow Brook should look like. We've just about escaped the site of the old steelworks, and this was a real workhorse at the steelworks. All the cooling waters from the steelworks were pumped back into here. There was a lot of stuff in this stream that shouldn't have been in here. It was quite badly polluted. Hard to imagine now. It looks as good as it does down the Peterborough end, but yeah, they did pump a lot of stuff into Willow Brook, and as I say, it was a real workhorse. I'm going to put up a few pictures really of the steelworks because we've sort of glossed over it, and Corby existed really as a town because of the steelworks. So I'm going to put up some fantastic pictures really that I remember from the 1970s driving through Corby. It was quite a magnificent sight, but obviously there is outfall from that, and the outfall went into the Willow Brook. Well, there you go, there's Corby Steelworks, fantastic site back in the 70s. Still there, but obviously not of the magnitude that it was in the decades leading up to the end of the 70s. Apart from the outfall from the steelworks, there's a sewage farm about 3/4 of a mile upstream from where we are now, and that also pumps cleaned water into Willow Brook, so it certainly earns its money, as they say. But as you can see, it looks great as we leave now into Weldon and downstream from there. Very nice. Drop down into the village of Weldon now, looking off the bridge on the Oundle Road. Very nice setting for the Willow Brook. As we head east of Weldon, we're right on the outskirts of Weldon here. We enter a new build development site, another one, and Willow Brook is just coming down through the centre of the picture. The tree belt on the right there is where the northern stream departs from the southern stream. That's where the two join or depart, depends how you look at it. And we're heading down now through what will be, in X number of years' time, or probably not too long, another new building site. And whether the Willow Brook gets swallowed up, whether it gets culverted, or whether they find a path through the new estate for it, at the moment I don't know. But at the moment it's trudging its way through a pretty ugly brownfield site towards what is the new part of the A427 that was built recently. And there you have the bridge that carries the new A427 over Willow Brook. As you leave the Corby area and as you leave Weldon, Willow Brook follows the course of the A43, which you can see to the right, pretty much in parallel all the way down to the village of Deenethorpe, which is where we're at now. Deenethorpe was actually the place where I first came across Willow Brook, down in the village. Very cute setting. We'll be setting off down there in a mo. It's a little bit barren in the winter months. Looks a lot cuter in the summer. We're in the village of Deenethorpe, or Dean as it really should be known. And this is the Willow Brook, looking good. As Willow Brook hooks round to the left in the woods there, it will be entering Dean Park, or the grounds of Dean Park, which is now a lake, as you'll see shortly. I'm going to try and find the entry point to Dean Park, which is going to be right on the busy A43. A bit risky, but we'll give it a go. Okay, we've crossed the A43 and here's the point where Willow Brook enters the lake at Dean Park, which we'll talk about shortly. You can just about make the edge of, make out the edge of the lake in the distance. As you can see, as Willow Brook enters, just behind that first row of trees, it becomes dammed up We're on the very edge of Deenethorpe Lake. We'll get a better view of it in a moment when I walk around the woods behind me, but yeah, it's all dammed up, and this used to just be Willow Brook running through this area. They put a dam in to dam it up just as an ornamental attraction for the house at Deenethorpe. If you had a big mansion, then you had to have a big ornamental lake, and they created it by damming Willow Brook. But in effect, the brook just runs through this lake and back out the other side, and we'll be seeing the exit point a little bit later. But yeah, I have maps that go back to I think the end of the 1700s and the very early 1800s that don't show this lake and just simply show the brook flowing in front of us through the park. That is Dean Hall, for which the lake was built. It's quite difficult to get a view of this place. And up until I think it was the 1820s, Willow Brook would have been running in the foreground near to the near bank of this lake, straight across the picture and out of the park. A lovely old early 1950s photograph here showing in the foreground near the foreshore the old course of Willow Brook winding its way across what was land before the lake was formed. Up in front of us is the dam wall that was built to hold back Willow Brook and basically create this lake, and the gap right in the centre was and still is the exit point where Willow Brook continues its journey downstream. We'll be clambering up there in a moment, having a look. Although Willow Brook would be running right behind me now across the lake, there was another stream running into Deenethorpe, which was Gretton Brook. Gretton Brook is in the distance straight ahead where the house is coming towards you from the distance, and the two used to meet. There used to just be a simple merger of Willow Brook and Gretton Brook, probably just somewhere over across to the right here, and then they would run out of the park. So it wasn't just Willow Brook that filled this lake up, it was Gretton Brook as well. It did have a brief link with the steelworks in, I think it was 1933, before the steelworks had a decent water supply. It looked at both this lake and Blatherwycke Lake just further down as potential water supplies, and it dredged this lake out, made sure it had a good head of water with the potential plan to use the water and pump it back up to the steelworks, but it never did. I've just about proved it never did. I found some old documents that said although they were ready to do it, they never installed pipe work and they never took water out of Deenethorpe. They did use it and have used it since to check water pollution levels, but they never used it to supply the steelworks. But it was available to the steelworks to use should they have needed it. But after 1940 they used Ibrook Reservoir to the north of Corby, and that was their main water supply, and they never needed this, thankfully. You'll have to excuse the noise, but this is today's exit point from Deenethorpe Lake and the restart of Willow Brook. And in the past this would have been exactly the same place that the brook would have just flowed out naturally. So I'll just turn around. That's a little bit more like it. Back up in the air, and you've got Willow Brook moving on into Dean Lake, where it would follow the right hand near bank before the 1820s, when the lake was built. Here you can see Gretton Brook coming in top left and heading down through the centre of the picture past Dean Hall itself in the middle of the photo. This is the Willow Brook exiting Dean Lake. The little white weir in the centre of the picture is where there used to be an 18th century watermill. You can't see much from up in the air, unusually, apart from that marker, that weir, to show where it was. But you can see a little bit more on the ground, as you'll see in just a moment. I've just scrambled about, I don't know, 50 yards downstream from the exit point from Dean Park Lake to this little weir here. On my oldest maps dating back to 1700s, late 1700s, there was a watermill here. Watermills have always fascinated me, and there's a few of them on Willow Brook further downstream, but this one didn't exist beyond mid-1800s. I suspect it may have disappeared when the lake was created. It may even have been a purely wooden structure, but having just said that, I've just noticed something in the bank I'm going to go and have a look at in a minute to just prove me wrong. But yeah, there was a watermill on this site. It's not documented anywhere, but it definitely appears on maps. But if you just bear with me. Brilliant. There's your proof. That would have been the exit point for the water from the mill, which means the wheel would possibly have been somewhere up there on the high ground. There's definitely a structure here. There's definitely a raised bank here. There's a raised bank on the other side of the weir as well. Yeah, definitely was a water mill here. I've just scrambled up above that exit point and found another structure here, which is, I'm quite taken aback by all this. I didn't expect to find anything. Which shows it was a proper brick-built watermill. Yeah, it's hard to pick out shapes, but again, the wheel was probably to the left of this building. I thought it might have been a wooden watermill, of which there were many back in the 1700s, and it didn't last very long, but this is definitely a brick and stone built structure. Very interesting. A lovely stretch of the Willow Brook, although there's plenty of water on it today, giving it a bit of colour. but we've walked down now from Dean Park towards Bulwick, village of Bulwick. We're about 3/4 of a mile short of Bulwick at the moment, and yeah, it's just a lovely stretch of the stream here. We're just heading up towards Bulwick village now. The main point of interest for me in Bulwick village is the watermill. It's the first still standing, at least to a degree, watermill on Willow Brook as you come down from Corby. I think it was a 1600/1700s build. I think it stopped operating around 1940. I might be wrong there, but I think it was 1940. It's been modified somewhat, but still very recognisable. When we get up there, I'll show you how it looks today, but I'll also put up a few pictures of how it was pretty much in its heyday, probably in the early part of the 1900s when it was still operational. Here we've got an aerial view of the back of Bulwick Mill and the mill house to its right. In front of that door to the left of the mill is where there would have been a mill race, a narrow stream of water heading through to power the mill, but it's been filled in. I knew it was. I was just interested to see whether the drone might show the area filled in, but it's not there. It's all been lawned and it's vanished. Willow Brook is to the left of the building. You can just about make it out in amongst those trees. Just coming down the hill in the village now towards the mill buildings. The building with what looks like letter S's on, which are just beam supports. That's the bakery that used to sit alongside the mill. So everything just flowed through to the bakery. It may still be a bakery, I can't really work it out. It does say it is on the wall, but it's not too clear and I don't want to get too close to it. But that's the old bakery building that was attached to the mill. The building rising to the left just above its roof is the mill house where they lived, where the miller lived and his family lived. And the actual mill building with the water wheel is now a single-storey building just to the right of it, as you'll see in a minute. The building with the 3 garage doors used to have 2 levels, as you'll see in this old picture. The top level was demolished, I think, in 1960-ish, because it was in a bad state of repair, and if it didn't come down it would have fallen down. You can probably only just see it on here. I will try and zoom in, but that sort of bricked up doorway, narrow one in the background, is where the water used to come out. Just on the ground below that, in front of that, although it's now filled in, was the where the water used to flow out from the wheel, from the mill race and back into Willow Brook, which is just below it on the right. But that is the modified mill building. There you have it. Bakery on the left, the 3-storey mill house where the miller and his family would have lived. In the centre, still a residential property, and the remaining 1 tier of the mill building on the right. Willow Brook on the right and Bulwick Mill on the left. These mills, as you may have seen in other videos I've done about water mills, they don't actually sit on the waterway, on the main waterway itself. The miller has his own water supply that comes off Willow Brook through that stone doorway, which is on the right there, back out of there, having pushed the wheel round, and then back into the brook. As I say, I think it finished working 1940 odd. I think the upper floor of the mill came down in the 60s, and I think the water wheel, if I remember rightly, was removed in around 1980, I think it was. We've moved about 1 mile down from Bulwick to Blatherwycke, one of the most scenic spots for the Willow Brook, and it looks mighty big for a brook here, and that's because this also, as with Dean Park, was dammed. I think it was 1927, something like that. It was in the 1920s. It was dammed because there used to be a big mansion house here and they wanted an ornamental lake. Sadly, the mansion house is gone. It was used during the Second World War for training and exercises and housing those that were training, and like so many houses at that time of that sort of era, and it dated back I think to 1700s, it was badly, I say badly dealt with. It was an important job and an important role it had, but the army, when they left it in a bad state of disrepair, and the owners decided they didn't want to keep it, didn't want to pay to restore it back again, and it was demolished, very sadly. I'll put a picture up of what it looked like, the only one I can find. And as you can see, it was quite a significant building, but it's gone. To the right of this picture, I'll just put my big ugly picture in just up here, is the walled garden, and the walled garden is still here. The house used to be to the left of that, but the lake obviously is still here and still exists, and was caused by the damming of Willow Brook, and it's still building back from the dammed section here, which is why it looks so wide, but it's still Willow Brook. Just looking off the other side of the bridge, you can't actually see the lake from here. It's quite a huge expanse of water just beyond the land there. I'll put up some footage I took a couple of years ago when I did a walk around the lake, and you get some idea. As you can see, it's quite a big dammed up piece of water. Not quite sure the house, big though it was, really needed to have a lake of this size, but there you go. In the top corner of Blatherwycke Lake was where the waters escaped back into Willow Brook. There was a watermill. Not sure when it was built. There is absolutely nothing on the internet that gives any information about this mill, but it was there, and it had stopped working by 1920, but in 1930, or in the 1930s, when the Corby Steelworks was desperate for water, they had their eyes on this place, as they did with Dean Park. But unlike Dean Park, they actually did use the water from Blatherwycke Lake, and they pumped it back up to Corby Steelworks, where ironically it went back into Willow Brook after they'd used it, and would flow all the way back down here again. And the pipe work and the pumping station for that water was in the basement, probably still is, of the watermill. So it certainly served a purpose for Corby, which is, I don't know, 8-9 miles upstream from here. It's pretty amazing that they managed to pump water that far back, but such was their desperation before the Ibrook Reservoir opened that they had to do it. Heading out across Blatherwycke Lake, which is a mighty big lake, made up entirely of a dammed up Willow Brook. In the distance would be the location for what was Blatherwycke Hall. Coming in from the right is the walled garden of Blatherwycke Hall, which is still standing, unlike the hall itself. And to the right you've got Willow Brook coming into the lake. As we head back in a moment to the road bridge. If you've never visited Blatherwycke, I would strongly recommend it. Lovely setting on a sunny day. Okay, we've just travelled probably less than a mile from Blatherwycke now, downstream to the outskirts of Cliffe, and I think if there's one stretch of the Willow Brook I'd recommend everyone comes down to see, it's this one. A stretch here from, as I say, the outskirts of Cliffe into the village itself. The brook just meanders beautifully through this shallow valley, I guess you'd call it, and it's at its absolute best here, particularly in spring and summer. I believe at this time of year it's always good to see. So yeah, next steps is I'm going to follow this down a short distance, come into the village and try to find the watermill that I believe still stands. I've never seen it before, so that'll be the next target. But yeah, this is one of my favourites, if not the favourite stretch of Willow Brook. Very nice here. Climbing now above the upstream section of Willow Brook as it approaches Cliffe Mill. The Willow Brook is the stream heading away from you, catching the sun there, snaking around the mill. The waterway at the bottom of the picture, heading left, was the mill race, which heads into the back of the mill, just coming into shot and used to power the wheel. And on the other side of the mill it would flow out and rejoin that looping Willow Brook to continue the journey downstream. There you have the Willow Brook heading eastward out of Cliffe. And as we swing round, you've got again catching the sunlight, the Willow Brook bypassing the mill and coming back into shot here to join the mill race just below the mill building in the bottom right of your picture. And a lovely shot back upstream through the mill, along the mill race, back upstream to join Willow Brook. There you have it. That is King's Cliffe Watermill, as was. Built in 1815, or at least this one was. Like most of these mill sites, they date back to 1600s and beyond, even to the Domesday Book there was a mill on this site. But this actual build was 1815, probably would have finished about 100 years after that. The noise you can hear is the actual water mill, sorry, the water wheel. The water wheel is still there and is still functioning. Not doing any work, but it's still rotating, and that's what the noise is. So I'm going to try and grab some pictures of it and see through the gap in the wall on the way back up. But that's the water mill. Good to see it standing. The water wheel is in the housing to the left. You can probably just see it going round inside this doorway here. We'll see it a bit better when we go back up the hill. But that's the mill race, that's the water driving that around and then coming out of this exit point back downstream. And believe it or not, really the Willow Brook is the stream to the right here, which went around the mill. The mill race came off Willow Brook, but then does its work at the mill and then rejoins Willow Brook to carry on downstream in the distance. See if we can see the wheel. There it is. Great to see that water mill in motion. Not often you find mills still standing, let alone still with the water wheel moving. That's quite rare and good to see. We've dropped down a very short distance from King's Cliffe now to Apethorpe, and you're not going to see much at Apethorpe, sadly, apart from this lovely little stretch that just passes alongside the village. The view from the other side of the bridge shows the Willow Brook opening up quite wide. That's because we're entering the grounds of Apethorpe Hall, now known as Apethorpe Palace, but really it's Apethorpe Hall. And it's as far as you can really go. I'd love to be able to get in there because there's a lake. It's been dammed up, I think quite late on, early to mid 1900s, to create a lake for the hall stroke palace. But as I say, you can't actually get in there. What I hope to be doing, you'll know now as you're watching the video, is to get a good friend of mine to take to the air and give you a rare view of something you just cannot see at ground level from any aspect around Apethorpe. Well, there you go, as planned. Willow Brook on the left, entering the lake at Apethorpe. Note the kites circling down below the drone. You can see the sediment being carried by Willow Brook into the lake, and Willow Brook itself exits top right corner as you're looking at it now, top left of the lake if you like, past those flooded fields. In the top right corner in a moment you'll just catch a glimpse of Apethorpe House, or as it's now known, Apethorpe Palace. There it is, just coming into shot. Good to see Willow Brook featuring in the new name of the village pub. Short distance along from Apethorpe is the village of Woodnewton, and probably my favourite watermill site anywhere in the country. It's a stunning location. Unfortunately there's builders in doing the roof, but it's this end of the building really that is the old mill, and the water wheel would have been in there, but it's been done up several times in the 1900s. Bits have been added on, bits have been bolted together, but it's still the most fantastic site, especially again if you come down in the summertime. Very pretty site. You've got Willow Brook on the left going under the sort of footbridges going around the mill, and the mill has its own little mill race that runs directly through, and just right of centre exits about 10 foot beyond where the watermill would have been. That's the exit point for the mill race. The wheel would have been directly in line with that, about 10 foot back. It's obviously a house now, so the wheel's long since gone. It stopped milling around 1906, and this version of the mill goes back to, I think, 1730s, something like that. And as I say, the mill is at this end of the building, or was, and the mill house was to the right. And sometime in the 1900s the two were sort of knocked through to make one big, very desirable residence. Definitely in the category of, if I win the lottery, I might just live here. Well, we've just wandered downstream from Woodnewton, and we're just entering the edges of Fotheringhay now, so I'm searching for the section of the waterway that is the trout stream, really, the fly fishing section. I haven't found it yet. I think it's a wee bit further downstream, but at least the sun's coming out, so muddy underfoot, but still following the brook. Well, I've reached the section that I know to be the fly fishing section. Unfortunately, there were some signs up the last time I came here about 2 years back showing that it was a fly fishing stretch and a fly fishing club, and they've gone. So you're going to have to trust me on that one. But yeah, this is another lovely stretch as you approach Fotheringhay village. Again, particularly in the summer, it's a lovely walk. I was reading up a couple of weeks back now about how this first became a trout stream, and as I suspected, the fish were introduced, but they were introduced back in the 1950s, middle of 1950s if I remember rightly, which surprised me, because obviously the Corby Steelworks was in its prime back then, so for the best part of 30 years the fish were in here, whilst the steelworks were still pumping in, if you like, dirty water. So it just shows how fantastically good Willow Brook is and was at cleansing itself, that it can go probably no more than 9 miles from the steelworks to here, and you go from pretty heavy pollution to trout, and they've introduced trout many times since then, probably annually, but I did read somewhere, and you can go online and read more detail than I'm going to give you, but they are putting a lot of effort in at the moment to create the sort of habitat that allow the trout to just naturalise here and have less of a reliance on introducing them, which is good news, and I wish them well. I think there's only 30 people in the club, so it's quite a small fly fishing club, but just to have the claim to fame that it's Northamptonshire's only trout stream, it's worth the effort, really is. This bridge always impresses me every time I see it. I have no idea the age of it, but I'd gamble a fair bit of money on it being at least 400 if not 500 years old. It really is an old one. It's on all of the maps I have going back to the early, I think 1720s, so it's been around many hundreds of years. Well, having crossed the fields from Fotheringhay, we enter the floodplains of the Nene, very close to Elton now, which is coming up now to the very end of Willow Brook. There's quite a lot of drainage channels that head off the brook at this end. This is a huge floodplain of the River Nene. In the past there's been some pretty devastating floods in this area, and they've cut a lot of drainage channels, so in order to drain the waters away if it floods again. But one of the effects of that is it takes quite a lot of water off. Willow Brook takes it across to the Nene in various places, so it's actually in effect a smaller stream at this end than it has been probably for the last few miles. But yeah, this is the run-in now. We're just heading across the fields towards Elton and the old watermill that's on the Nene, and yeah, this is the last throes of the brook. Well, there you have it. That's probably the last 10 yards, 10 metres of Willow Brook. You can just see in the centre of the picture the flow of the old River Nene heading right to left, and Willow Brook entering at the end of its 15-mile run from the other side of Corby. There you have it, Willow Brook coming in from the right, and the course of the old Nene running in front of it. There's a lot of waterways around this part of the countryside around Elton. There's the mill race, there's all the spillways around the mill, there's all sorts of anti-flood streams that have been dug out, and it's easy to lose your track of what is what, but that is Willow Brook, and this is the old Nene. Pretty much untouched, the old part of the Nene now down here. It's as it was once. If you walk nearer to Elton Watermill, as many do, there's some much wider streams than this, but they're really just remnants of what was originally the mill race, although it's become probably the main navigable part of the Nene now. You wouldn't be bringing boats up here, but this is original. This is the bit that appears on old maps and is the end of the road for the Willow Brook. There you have the last half a kilometre of Willow Brook coming across the floodplains down into Elton to join the old course of the River Nene and the end of its journey. There you have the old Nene snaking around in front of the Willow Brook, and that is the end point of our journey. Okay, that's the end of the trip. Hope you enjoyed the video. It's been quite good fun travelling down and seeing what we've seen. As ever with these sort of things, and probably never more so than with this video, I'm indebted to the help of individuals all the way along the route, and to information sources, limited though they have been on the internet. So rather than try and trawl through them all and remember everybody who I owe a thumbs up to, I'll offer my thanks and give them due credit on the next page at the end of the video. But yeah, thank you to all of them. Excuse me, without them wouldn't have made it. But yeah, good fun. Hope you enjoyed it. There's Willow Brook for you.